like to talk today about something that's very, very important in this life. Something that most people don't really know an awful lot about. I found out about this subject when I was in Grendon prison many years ago. And what I did was, by then I was in my 4th prison sentence. Life was a bit of a horror show. But I found out that there was somebody else inside of me. The way I'd behaved in one sense on the outside was all false. It was all a big act, really. But someone else was on the inside, somebody more genuine, somebody more real. And it wasn't just a matter of there being a softer, more genuine aspect to myself on the inside. That person had a different destiny than the one I'd created on the outside. Very, very different. I'm one of the lucky people in life, I suppose. Or maybe I was determined or desperate. But I managed to break the outer shell in my life and got in touch with who I really am. And who I really am started to run the show. It started to carve a way through life and make a way for me. That was quite remarkable. In fact, many people find it hard to believe the life I led from 22 years on. I'm 58 years old now. It's been, 36 years since then. And that destiny, that sense of life, has never stopped flowing for me. But included in this story today, I'd like to talk about a man called Viktor Frankl. And the reason I want to talk about that is because he discovered what happened to me. He discovered it in a scientific way. And when I talk about him and I talk about me, you might find that you have the same inside of you. Because I believe, and I'm convinced, that at the very core of my being, it's eternal. At the very core of my being is what I was always meant to be. At the core of my being, it was meant to be before I even was born on this earth, and it will continue to be. After this body dies, that life inside of me will continue in another capacity. Now, Viktor Frankl, he wrote a book many years ago, in the 1950s I think he wrote it, called Man's Search for Meaning. And it's been one of the most influential books ever written. In America, since the 1950s till today, every single year, this particular book is considered one of the top 10 most influential books. And yet, it's barely 100 pages long. And it's very simple to read. He wrote it in a wonderful way. Just to repeat, the book is called Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl himself was a Jew who lived in Austria in the Second World War, and so therefore he and his family were rounded up by the Nazis and taken to concentration camps. Most of his family were killed. In fact, I think all of his family were killed. But he was a young man at the time, and in his pocket he tried to keep with him a manuscript for a book that he felt convinced that he was supposed to write. But of course he was in a concentration camp. Not only did he lose the manuscript, he lost his clothes, he lost his dignity, he lost his health, he lost everything. And he could barely stay alive. When the war was over and the camps were liberated, he was one of the fortunate ones who got his life back. He didn't die in the camps. But it wasn't until he got back to Vienna and he started to think about his experiences and write about them. He started to realize something that might be important for you, was definitely important for me, and certainly was massively important in his life. And that was, it didn't matter how dark things were, it was just interminable suffering every single day for a number of years. You can imagine it. People dying at his side, people being shot, disease, crippled, worked to death, suicides. It was just constant every day. Thousands and thousands of people going through this in Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. I was very lucky. I went to that camp to visit, and part of the reason I went there was to somehow feel his experience, to feel him And it was right at the end of the tour that I did there. It started to rain, it was cold, it was miserable, I was very tired. And we just went to this final hut, and we got inside, and there, when I saw this little fireplace at the bottom of a chimney, and he'd written in his book how he'd often sat by it at night while all the prisoners were sick, and he was supposed to be looking after them, that I somehow connected with him, you know. This is just the sort of place he sat in, one of these huts, and it could as well be this one, you know. Anyway, whilst this monstrous life that he was living in the death camps was going on around him, something inside of him kept believing he would have his school of psychology and he would write his book. But it wasn't until he was released and he looked back that he started to realise that that was the thing that kept him alive. It wasn't extra food or luck, or it wasn't being strong, physically strong. He didn't have any more of any of those things than anybody else. And then he thought about some of his comrades. And through the days of, like I say, interminable horror, many people just gave up. And you have to realise something here. When a person is that thin and malnourished and no end in sight, if you give up hope, you will die. So your life is hanging on by hope alone. That's the only thing that's keeping you going. And he noticed that most of the people who survived were like him, that they felt that life still held a purpose for them. They were able to reach through the tapestry, this horrible visage of what was going on, and somehow hang on to a sense that life expected something from them and it had not happened yet. So he wrote about that in his book, and then some American psychologists read it and they wanted to find out whether this was true, because it's a remarkable thing if it is. In the Vietnam War, there was a number of pilots shot down in North Vietnam, and they were held in Hanoi. The prison where they were held was called the Hanoi Hilton, which was a joke because it was such a wicked place with lots of torture, a lot of pain, and many years of being locked in confined spaces. Terrible. But they went and interviewed a number of survivors, and they talked about what Frankl had said. You know, is there a power in knowing that you're supposed to do something in life still? Is there some kind of an energy that keeps you alive, that brings you onto something that life is demanding from you? Life still wants something from you, and it's not finished yet. And remarkably, they found it was true. And the reason why this means so much to me in my life, and I'd like to somehow convey it to you in your life, is because my life also went through interminable suffering. You know, it was my 4th time in prison. I mean, I was so embarrassed about my behaviour, so embarrassed about being such a failure. You know, I just hated it. I mean, there's a time when you're young and you're a bit of a lad on the streets and you're fighting a bit, you can get put away and you can come back, and it almost adds to your reputation. It makes you even more. But in fact, if you just keep doing it, you very quickly then become a loser. You just become a nobody. In fact, you become an idiot because you just can't get out. And I must say, like I said in the beginning, there's nothing worse in life than feeling as if you just can't get out. Now, when I was at school, when I was a little boy, I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I had a school teacher who I didn't like at all, so my class wasn't much fun. But anyway, he was off sick, and this replacement teacher came, this lady, and she was very, very different than him. She was bright, and she was breezy, and she was friendly and kind. Anyway, long story short, she said to us on the second day, I'd like us to do poetry, she said, but it's poetry that doesn't rhyme, you know. So we were all a bit stumped on that one. Poetry doesn't rhyme. And of course what she meant was creative writing, which is a type of poetry. And for our subject, she picked fire. She said, write about fire. And so there I was, my piece of paper and my little pencil in my class, and I didn't know what to do. And but then suddenly, out of the blue, something inside of me just began to pour out. I became lost in the words. It was like a romance. It was incredible. I just got completely lost in what I was writing. And before I know it, a girl was standing at the desk saying, I've come to collect your work. And I was like, and as she took it away, I was embarrassed. I thought, what have I written? I was almost afraid. There's a reason why I'm telling you this. After the teacher had collected the work in, she read my work, called out, who's James? And I was embarrassed. I was like, oh God, here we go. And she read out my work and she was in raptures about it. So much so, she went home and read it even more. And then I think it was the day after, I came home from school and my mother said to me, come and sit down a minute, I need to speak to you. And I thought, oh, here we go, I'm in trouble again. But I wasn't in trouble at all. She said, the teacher from your school came to visit the house. And I thought, wow, that's a bit weird, you know, school is school and home is home. You know, never the twain shall meet. And she'd gone to my house and said to my mother, your son has got an extraordinary talent and he's going to write books one day. You need to help him and encourage him. Well, my mother was so proud. But what my mother didn't know, and what nobody knew, was the words of that teacher meant more to me than anything I'd ever heard in my life. I felt so warm, so special, so amazingly lifted up by this. And what nobody knew either was that I went upstairs to my bedroom, and it was like as if I had a little box in here, in my heart, and I put that treasure of her words in that treasure box, and I kept them. I didn't know at that time, but my life was about to fall off a cliff. My home life would be broken to pieces. I would be living on the streets for a number of years when I was a young man. And then I'd go to prison 4 times. And even between sentences, my life was a complete horror show. I was lost. But you know what? I don't know why. A bit like Viktor Frankl, I just don't know why. I used to feel like I'm going to make something of all this. Somehow, some way. I don't know how. But there's a reason for all this. And I'm going to come out the other side. I'll give you an example. I went to Borstal the second time I got put away. I lost all my remission. You usually do about 9 months, 8 months in Borstal. You get sentenced to like 9 months to 2 years, anything between that. Well, I nearly did the whole 2 years. I was so bad. I wasn't just bad outside, I was bad inside. And when I came home, I was sat at the kitchen table of my mother's house, and it was first day out, and I sat there, and almost in a daydream, you know, you can speak in a daydream, said to my mum, I said, there's something about all this, something about my life. I've got to figure it out, you know, it's like a test, it's like a riddle. And if I can just figure it out, then the answer that I find for myself will be an answer for many other people too. And I knew that was true. And I knew that's what I would write about. So it was an extension of the original message from the school teacher. That not only would I be a writer, but I'd have a writer with a purpose. And the purpose would be that whatever set me free would set other people free, because I'd be able to express it in some manner. But at that time I still had 2 very, very tough prison sentences to go, and I was about to live probably the worst years of my life. But I can honestly say, when it was all over, and I changed beyond recognition, it was like a miracle. There's no other way to say it. When I was in Grendon prison, I found out that underneath the harsh exterior that I'd created, and it was created by me. I mean, a lot of our identities in life, it's just a big make-believe thing that we get stuck inside of. But inside that, underneath that, is the real, eternal person, the real one. So Viktor Frankl, looking back from Vienna, back to Auschwitz, realized that between his knowledge that he would write the book and writing the book, the space between the two, some kind of energy must have been going on, keeping him alive, paving the way, creating the opportunities. And it was the same for me. My life sometimes seemed to be hanging by a thread, and most people around me would think, oh, he's wasted his life, it's a cast-off. But you know, by connecting with who I really am, and knowing, I knew with everything in me that that teacher was right, that I would write that book. And I have written the books now, and I'll write more. And I have communicated with people, and it has made a huge difference in their life. And the reason why I'm saying this today, in this particular message, is because even some people with money and houses and lots of things, they still feel that you've not done what you're supposed to do in this life. You're missing the mark. And of course there's many people out there listening to this who might feel, you know, your life is in a mess and you tried this and tried that and tried the other. But one of the things that I would like to encourage you to do is think back to when you were a child. Think back to younger days. What were the dreams of your childhood? What kind of things did you have the courage to dream about? And I say courage because as you get older, it's hard to have that kind of courage. It's hard to have that kind of dream. But if you connect, like Frankel did, and like I did, with what your purpose of life is, and there is a purpose in you, I want you to look at me and know there is a purpose in your life. It doesn't matter even what you think. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks. It doesn't matter how many mistakes you've made. It doesn't matter how wrong it's gone. It doesn't matter how bad the picture looks. Frankel's picture couldn't have looked even worse, could it? Couldn't have looked worse than a death camp. And mine wasn't far behind. And maybe yours looks similar. But you know what? By pure knowing by Frankel, and pure knowing by me, the future was made possible. The dream was brought to bear. And that's my message for you today. A message of hope, and a message of vision, a message of knowing, and I wish you well. Thank you.